means for Caleb.
I think Caleb will be fine. I mean, Rome Odunze is their #1 receiver. Luther Burden has shown that he's good. They got the tight ends. Loveland,
yes.
I mean, was better than Komet for them. So, like, they're fine. I don't know. I don't want to overplay or overstate whatever issues may have been with him and Moore. A lot of people have done that, particularly with that miscommunication. There seemed to be a little frustration or tension there. I don't think it was too much, but I just think they'll be fine without it. They got enough weapons and talent. And, Colin was saying, do they use some of the money they've cleared up to go get a Maxx Crosby or maybe the center Tyler Linderbaum? So, yeah, I mean, I think they'll be fine. They got enough receivers.
Yeah, so I agree with that piece of it. I think had they not traded him, he would have gone into next year as their 4th option. Because I think Colson Loveland's going to be their #1 option. That was Ben Johnson's first pick. Yep. He was excellent. You saw Burden come on at the end of last year in particular, and, they spent a high pick on him. And Odunze, they obviously spent a very high pick on before Ben Johnson got there. And so I think that they are, I don't want to say they're not going to miss DJ Moore, but if he was going to be their 4th option, $24 million to be the Bills' #1 receiver is a bargain. $24 million to be the Bears' 4th option is a misallocation of resources.
And I don't think they'll miss him. As good as I think he is and as like him for Buffalo, I think they'll.
I don't think you miss him as long as your guys stay healthy. You know what I mean? And so that's the concern. But you went somewhere where similar place I was going. They now have picks 25, 57, and 60. Would you trade those 3 picks for Maxx Crosby? A late first and 2 late seconds. 25, 57, 60.
Yes. I think I would. They're right there on the cusp. It's time to win. He gets you,
And so now
the win-win. The Raiders win. They get a bunch of assets.
They get a bunch of assets. You have the money to do it. Yeah. You could still spend money, to your point, on Linderbaum. You could try to address offensive line in free agents. And again, they're in a weird spot because I think they feel left tackle's Tooney, who's great, and right guard, right tackle is set, but their left tackle had a terrible injury during the playoffs and their center retired. So they do need to address that. There's no doubt about it. But I think now you have, for the Raiders, if you are trying to get Maxx Crosby, the 60th pick is probably more attractive to the Raiders than DJ Moore.
The situation surrounding the Chicago Bears presents a fascinating analytical puzzle, and I find myself in substantial agreement with Nick's assessment regarding the offensive implications. Moving on from DJ Moore, while notable, will not derail Caleb Williams' development trajectory. When I examine this offense through the lens of Ben Johnson's established philosophy, the emerging identity suggests a run-first approach complemented by tight end utilization. Johnson's offensive pedigree indicates a commitment to establishing the ground game as the foundation. Establishing the run consistently and effectively will define this scheme. Furthermore, I would argue that organizations failing to cultivate a quarterback-tight end dynamic reminiscent of the Mahomes-Kelsey connection are making a strategic error, particularly when developing an ascending quarterback. Examining the careers of historically elite quarterbacks reveals 2 consistent denominators across dynasties: exceptional coaching and elite tight end production. Literally, the all-time great quarterbacks shared the benefit of historically significant tight ends. Rob Gronkowski with Tom Brady, Travis Kelce with Patrick Mahomes. This pattern carries meaningful weight. The Bears would be wise to prioritize developing that specific relational dynamic within their offensive infrastructure. However, the offensive line situation represents a genuine concern requiring attention. Johnson's offensive philosophy depends fundamentally on successful rushing execution. If protection issues persist, particularly in the run game, the entire system faces obstacles. An additional complicating factor involves the center's responsibility for protection calls. Caleb Williams was not handling those assignments at this stage of his development. The timeline for transferring those responsibilities remains unclear across different coaching philosophies. Various staffs implement different approaches depending on trust levels in the center's capabilities versus the quarterback's readiness. The developmental trajectory the Bears envisioned for Williams specifically remains opaque to outside observers. Nevertheless, among the numerous challenges confronting the Chicago Bears organization, the DJ Moore departure ranks relatively low in significance regarding net impact. the effect registers as essentially neutral. Nick characterized this as a luxury item rather than a necessity, and that framing resonates. Depth provides comfort, insurance against injuries, but foundational requirements take precedence over luxuries. The Maxx Crosby trade speculation introduces an entirely separate analytical dimension, requiring thorough examination. Reports suggest the Raiders seek 2 first-round selections for Crosby's services, and they may well command that premium. The proposed compensation of a first-round pick plus 2 seconds represents substantial draft capital deployment. Evaluating this potential transaction requires weighing multiple variables. Acquiring Crosby would immediately elevate the defensive unit. He represents an elite talent, and any organization adding his services improves unquestionably. However, the acquisition cost extends beyond draft compensation. The Bears would also need to negotiate a substantial contract extension for Crosby while simultaneously addressing offensive line inadequacies through remaining resources. The question becomes whether Chicago stands as a Maxx Crosby away from legitimate championship contention. I remain skeptical of that proposition. The draft picks surrendered in such a transaction carry inherent value, particularly for a team with multiple roster needs. Selecting impact players, especially defensively, in the first and second rounds, provides cost-controlled talent requiring no immediate financial commitment. This approach preserves flexibility for addressing other roster deficiencies. There is something appealing about maintaining optionality. I find myself oscillating on this question. My admiration for Maxx Crosby as a player is unequivocal. He represents defensive excellence, and I would celebrate his addition enthusiastically. The excitement would be genuine. Yet the analytical voice questions whether this singular move transforms the Bears into legitimate title contenders. The offensive line requires attention. Defensive depth beyond Crosby remains questionable. The roster contains multiple gaps. The timeline consideration adds another layer of complexity. In an ideal scenario, Chicago would utilize their current draft capital, evaluate and develop those selections, and then deploy next year's assets toward acquiring someone like Crosby. That approach would inspire greater comfort. Unfortunately, Crosby's apparent trajectory suggests movement sooner rather than later. This accelerates the decision timeline. Comparing this potential transaction to other recent trades proves instructive. Mid-season acquisitions operate differently from pre-draft moves. Post-draft trades, similar to the Cowboys' eventual Micah Parsons deal, occupy a middle ground. Dallas executed that transaction too late to impact their competitive window meaningfully. The Cowboys' defense would have benefited from earlier acquisition, potentially altering their season trajectory and avoiding wasting an exceptional offensive campaign from Dak Prescott. The Rams provide an alternative model. They aggressively replaced future picks with immediate impact players, prioritizing present competitiveness over long-term asset accumulation. That approach carries different risk-reward calculations. For Chicago, trading for Crosby now represents a hybrid situation, simultaneously mortgaging future flexibility while investing heavily in present improvement, yet without guarantee of championship readiness. The complexity of these decisions extends far beyond casual observation. The ecosystem of NFL roster management constitutes its own multi-million-dollar industry, employing legions of professionals dedicated exclusively to optimizing draft capital allocation, salary cap navigation, trade evaluation, and free agency strategy. This separate professional wing exists precisely because these calculations resist simple resolution. Attempting to casually master this complexity from outside the industry parallels sitting at home trying to maximize YouTube revenue streams without specialized expertise. Do you show more advertisements or fewer? Longer videos or shorter content? More uploads or selective quality? Shorts or long form? Quick cuts or extended analysis? The variables multiply beyond comfortable comprehension. The equivalent of a multi-million-dollar industry cannot be casually replicated from a home studio, regardless of production quality. Returning to the Bears' specific crossroads, the philosophical tension deserves exploration. Aggressive win-now moves carry intuitive appeal. Elite talent acquisition generates excitement. But sustainable contention requires foundational stability. Draft picks represent both assets and options, preserving organizational flexibility while young talent develops on cost-controlled contracts. Trading multiple high-value selections for a single player, even one as exceptional as Crosby, concentrates risk while reducing optionality. The ideal pathway might involve utilizing this year's draft to address multiple needs, then positioning for future impact acquisitions when the roster foundation stabilizes. However, opportunity windows do not always align with preferred timelines. Crosby's availability now may not extend indefinitely. The Raiders' asking price may increase, or the player may ultimately remain in Las Vegas. These are not simple calculations with obvious answers. The appropriate response involves acknowledging complexity rather than pretending clarity. The Bears face legitimate philosophical choices about how aggressively to pursue present improvement versus future flexibility. There are reasonable arguments supporting multiple approaches. I am genuinely interested in your perspectives on both questions. How do you evaluate the DJ Moore trade impact on Chicago's trajectory? Does moving on from him create meaningful consequences for the offense? Regarding the potential Maxx Crosby acquisition, does surrendering substantial draft capital for a premier defensive talent position the Bears for contention, or does it compromise their ability to address multiple roster needs? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every response regardless of whether alignment exists with my analysis. Agreement or disagreement matters less than fostering substantive discussion and perhaps spirited debate, though ultimately the objective remains enjoying the conversation. Please consider subscribing to the channel. We are cultivating an exceptional community, and I would genuinely welcome your participation. My aspiration involves creating something we all feel authentically connected to, something generating genuine excitement about membership. I believe we progress meaningfully toward that objective. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up, as it genuinely supports visibility and algorithmic reach. Thank you sincerely. I will see you in the next video.